Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to see everybody here this morning. If you have your Bibles, please turn over to James chapter 2. James chapter 2, that's where we are going to park it this morning. And real quick, before we start, just want to say, if you want to know anything about me, that section right there, don't ask any questions from about 13 to 18, okay? We're square, good to go. Anything after that, you're perfectly okay with doing. Where's Brent? I would, but I'm not gonna. I do need schooling, okay? James chapter 2, verse 1, it says there, "My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory." We have been in a sermon series called Discipleship, in which we're looking at what does the Bible actually say, not about Christianity, not about this word that's become generalized in society, but what does it mean to be a follower? And on the basis of what it means to be a follower, maybe we need to start moving back in that direction about what the New Testament says with regards to discipleship. And so last week we kind of started into a new area of this sermon series in which we're not going to talk about general ideas about discipleship, but what does it mean practically to look like a disciple? The first thing that we said last week is that a disciple is a doer, not just a hearer. That comes from James chapter 1, as we saw last week, verses 22 through 26. And so this week, what we're going to look at is James chapter 2, which follows right after that section, which is actually in the context of being a hearer and a doer. Not just a hearer, as so deceiving yourself. And I have a really tight rope to walk this morning. I completely and totally understand that, because what we're going to look at this morning is something that all of us at some point in our life have either come across, dealt with, or experienced. And it's not something that's flashy. It's not something ultra exciting. It's something that even to this day exists and has existed throughout all time, throughout all societies. And if we're not careful, it will plague our ability to get the gospel to people. And if we're not careful, this disease can even disrupt and disunify an entire group of people known as the church. And what we see, the theme of James is that faith works even when life happens. Faith works when life happens. And in James chapter 2, he's going to address something, a systemic problem in the church that he's writing to. And as I said before, it is something that still is a problem today. And here's the tight rope that I have to walk this morning. See, because for some of you are brand new Christians. You've been buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of your sins, and you have this zeal, and you are on fire, and you're just waiting to get after it. And so my job this morning is to make sure that in talking about this subject, that I don't snuff out the flame. And some of you here this morning are people who are just now, recently, returning to a relationship with God. And you're excited to rediscover God. You're excited to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. And so I still have to make sure that as we talk about this very serious subject, that flame and that zeal isn't sucked from you because of the text this morning. And then there's some of us here this morning that we've been Christians for 10, 20, 30 years. And we've never dealt with this subject. And we've never dealt with the problems that we ourselves face. And so my tightrope that I have to walk with you is from your mindset is that I'm not allowed, right? Sometimes we get in that mindset that I'm not allowed to be so aggressive with the text that it causes you to get upset. Well, this morning I'm telling you, you're probably going to get upset if that's you. And I hope this morning that we feel the full weight of what's being discussed in James in light of what we see in society, what we see in our lives, and what we see in the gospel. And so what James talks about, as he's just talked about being a hearer and a doer, not just a hearer that deceives himself, he goes on a run here, as I'd like to say, in all of chapter 2, deals with being the doer of the word, and he uses practical application. And sometimes as we hear sermons, sometimes as we attend classes, we kind of like those classes that don't really give us practical application, because I can feel satisfied by what's said, but I don't have a call to action, and that's okay because I can stay complacent and idle with that. James, knowing this, gives a application in chapter 2, but before we get into chapter 2, we really need to look at the verse prior to it. Because the last thing that James said to these people, as he's talking about being a doer of the word and not just a hearer, is this. He said, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, that you visit orphans and widows in their afflictions, and, see, that's the first part of pure and undefiled religion, an issue that he's talking about there, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Which means that the world doesn't make an impact, doesn't make a mark on me, so that by it, my own spiritual walk is diluted. That my own spiritual walk is poisoned. And so then from there he says, my brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of our glory. So he says, hey, this is one of the ways in which you and I stay unstained by the world, is that we show no partiality as we hold to the faith in Jesus. And what's so interesting about this word hold, and if you're marking in your Bibles, you should put this right there next to it. This word hold means to have in a sense of wearing. It's not just something that I put in my hand and I have it for a season and then I just kind of put it on the shelf. It's like a ring that is worn to show solidarity and unity with somebody else. Kind of like a marriage ring. And so he's saying here that as you hold, as you wear your faith, as you wear Jesus Christ in your day-to-day interactions with people and your day-to-day interactions with your brothers and sisters in Christ, show no partiality. Show no favoritism on the basis of the outward things that you see. And he gives a prime example here in this section. He says, for if a man wearing gold rings and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, you sit here in the good place, while you say to the poor man, you stand over there, or you sit there at my feet. And we're going to talk about the second section right there. But notice what's taking place in this assembly. People are being sat, and people are shown favoritism on the basis of what they look like. That doesn't happen today. Right? We don't see that happen at school. We don't see that happen in our jobs. We don't see favoritism anywhere in society, do we? Of course we do. That's what society is really driven by. And don't we tend, to drift towards people who make it easier to do life with? Isn't it easier that if I'm, middle class and I have a decent income and I have all these things and I love sports, isn't it easier to drift towards people that look exactly like me? Why? Because it's easier to do that. There's nothing hard about being around somebody, and this is just practical application, and some of y'all are going to snicker and some of y'all are going to laugh, but it's just easier to be around Duke fans. It just is. Because there's nothing hard about that. Isn't that right, Angelica? She goes to UNC, that's why I said it. And so it's easier to be around those people because there's a commonality there. It's easier for me personally, and for the vast majority of us here, and strap in, it's easier for most of us to hang around middle-class white America. Because that's who the majority of us are. And so when it comes time, to make my decision, and when it comes time to really find out who I'm going to associate with, it's easy to drive towards the people that look like us, that walk like us, that talk like us, that don't challenge us to get to know somebody who's different. It's easy for me to hang around middle class. It's hard for me. It's hard for us to associate with the poor because we believe we've got nothing in common. That's essentially what he says here. And if you're the 1%er, guess what? It's easier for you to hang around the 1%. Because guess what? That's who you have most in common with. And you know what that means? That means that in that easiness, in that coziness, the challenge is to step outside that circle, is to step outside that box as to show people Jesus, who I have nothing in common with. It's hard to do that. And so he notes, and based on the outward appearance, that they are discriminating against the poor guy, the poor person, in favor of the rich person. And notice what else is stated here. And he says there, you stand over here, or you sit at my feet. Have you not made a distinction among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Now the question at hand is, why are they evil? Why have they become judges that have evil thoughts? Because guess what they've done? They have subdivided, guys. Guys, they've subdivided where God never made a subdivision. They've subdivided where God never made a subdivision. And after all, who died and made them God? Take a look with me real quick over at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. As he's talking to the Corinthians, he says in verse 26, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful, not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that it is written, let the one who boasts, boast to the Lord." And so the question that James is bringing to the forefront of this situation is, who are you? Who are you to divide the congregation? Who are you to show favoritism in this congregation? Who are you to discriminate where God has made no such rule and made no such law? We often talk about the idea of what it means to keep the gospel, what it means to do this in Scripture and do that in Scripture. It is just as wrong to make a law as it is to break a law in Scripture. And these people have made a law where there is no such law. And after all, who were they? What was so great about these people that James was talking to that allowed them to take the position of judge, jury, and executioner of prejudice? Because after all, consider their calling. Because after all, and here's the problem with that, is that when we do that, when we subdivide, where God has made no subdivision, the problem is, the reason that he calls them evil is because they have operated outside of the will of God. They have operated outside of the mercy and the forgiveness and the compassion of God. Because what they've done is they've said, hey, in order for you to be right, in order for you to be seen as holy, and in order for you to assimilate yourself into this congregation, you need us to tell you how you should look, act, walk, and we carve our own little idol of what people need to be so that they might get close to us. And that's never been the desire of God nor the call of the gospel. That in order for people to get to God, they have to look like me. The point of the gospel is that in order for to get to God, they need to look and act like Jesus. And to subdivide where God has not made a subdivision is to not portray the gospel. And so notice what he also says there. He notes, listen, my beloved brothers. Has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to those who love? You look throughout the scripture and you look at how Jesus interacted and what Jesus said about the difference between the poor and the rich. More often than not, I would say every time that Jesus mentions the poor, he talks about blessed are those who are poor in spirit. He talks about it's the poor, the meek, who will inherit the kingdom of God. Yet it's hard for the rich to get into the kingdom of God. It'd be easier than to what? A camel to go through the eye of the needle than it would be for a rich man to enter heaven. And so there are two uses of poor. It's the person that is in literal poverty and says, God, I don't know how I'm going to get there. God, I don't know what I'm going to do. God, I don't have the resources. It doesn't seem like I have the resources, but I'm depending on you. And then there's the person who's poor in spirit, who comes to God in humility and meekness and understands their position in relation to the holiness of God and says, I can't do it by myself. I can't get there no matter how good I think I am, or no matter how good I think I'm acting. I can't get there. See, the opposite of poor is rich. So the person who is poor in spirit enters the kingdom of God, yet the person who is rich in self-righteousness is the one who is evil and who's wicked. Because they've made themselves a mini God. And the point that James is trying to get across to these people is that there's no discrimination in a disciple. That there's no discrimination in a disciple. And so he makes themselves many gods. And notice what he says. This is so important because this is exactly where mainstream Christianity is today. This is exactly maybe where we are today. Notice what he says in verse 5. He says in verse 6, but you have dishonored the poor man. So there's two dishonors that are going on. One, you've dishonored God because what you've done is you've taken the place of God. You sat on your own throne and you've made distinctions that God never made distinctions about. But also you've dishonored your own brother. Why? Notice what the text says. You've dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you? And the ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you are called? Because you've dishonored God because you've taken his position, but you've also dishonored your brother because you've sat him over to the side, literally and figuratively, so that you can cozy up to the people that give you the most problems. I mean, how ridiculous is that? But how often do we do it? How often in our desire to be seen as, quote, tolerant or cool relevant or nice or popular. When we set our faith and our brothers and sisters aside so that we can snuggle up to the world that doesn't care anything, on average, about Christianity. And so the rich here are the people in that time frame of the first century, as he said, are the people that gave Christianity the most promise. Because who were the rich people in that time frame? The Romans. And what were the Romans all about? Rome. Who is God? Caesar. What was the problem? Christianity. Who was the other problem? The Jews. And so my question for us this morning is, how often are we setting aside those times in which we can fellowship with our brothers and sisters, those times in which we can engage our faith so that people do see us as relevant and tolerant and cool? And the point that I'm simply trying to make is that our incessant need to be seen as cool and relevant and hip and tolerant has to stop. It has to die. Because when we do that, we don't allow the subdivisions to take place. We don't allow ourselves to become mini-gods, and we don't dishonor our own brothers and sisters for the sake of being cool. Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name of which you were called? And so now he makes a shift in verse 8. And he says, If you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You do well. So remember what Jesus said? The whole law can be summed up in 2 commandments. Love God and love people. It says, if you fulfill that royal law, you do well, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you show partiality, you're committing sin and are convicted by the law as a transgressor. For whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become accountable for it all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, has also said, do not murder. And if you do not commit adultery, but you do murder, you've become a transgressor of the law. And so this would be the response scene into what James is writing. James is saying, hey, don't show partiality. And the response would be, well, I mean, is it really that big a deal, James? Because after all, I haven't murdered anybody. I mean, so what if we set the poor guy in the back right corner or back left corner, and so that the people who look rich and look nice and look good can sit up front? I'm not murdering anybody. I'm not committing adultery. I mean, couldn't you just see the congregation there? I mean, there are plenty of people in this place that are doing that. So who cares about the poor guy? And James calls them back to what the law actually says and what the law actually represents. That if you miss one part of the law, you're guilty of the whole thing. So go ahead and not commit murder and not commit adultery, but treat your neighbor and your brother less than what God requires. And guess what? You discriminated. You haven't loved your neighbor as yourself. And on that basis, you are guilty of the entire law. Well, James, I don't want that. I don't want to be guilty of the whole law. So what are you telling me to do? Do the word. Do the word. Don't just hear the word. Just don't hear the preacher say, hey, don't show any partiality. Hey, don't discriminate. Do it. Engage those people who don't look like you, who don't act like you, who don't walk like you, who don't come from the background that you come from, don't have the socioeconomic standing that you have. And for some of the millennials here, that means engaging people that don't have Facebook. That's a joke, you can laugh. And so he says, do the law. It says, so speak and so act, right? Don't just say it. Act it out, who are to be judged under the law of liberty. That's a direct quote from what we saw in James chapter 1, verse 25. But the one who looks intently into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will judged in the law of liberty, of freedom. For the judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. That's a scary verse. I literally have goosebumps right now as I read that verse, because by the same standard that I judge, I will be judged. By the same amount of partiality that I show, I will be judged by that partiality. And I don't know about you and where you stand with God this morning, but I know that on the day of judgment, all the grace and the mercy and the compassion that He has, I want Him to use it all on me, because I need it all. And just think about this for a second. We have people here in the book of James who are showing partiality towards people on the basis of the outward expression of who they are and what they look like. And the question that should be asked even now is, what if God used that standard on me? On us? What would that look like? Could we really sing the song if God were to use the standard that we use? Would we even have the ability to sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound? Or would we walk the halls of our jobs, our schools, and even our congregations and sing the song, Troublesome Times Are Certainly Here? I think if we were honest with ourselves, we would say, man, if God used the same standard that I use, it'd be troublesome times. But the great thing about God is that He didn't do that. The great thing about God is that He not only said something way back here in Jeremiah 31:31 that He was going to make a new covenant, He did something about that in the person of Jesus Christ, who came, who walked, and lived a perfect life. And the great thing about Jesus as our example is that He showed no partiality. He talked to women, He talked to men, He talked to children, He talked to Romans, He talked to Jews, He talked to Samaritans, He talked to the sick, He talked to the wealthy, He talked to the arrogant, He talked to the humble. And He taught a group of men who didn't know what was going on. And He even forgave all of them who denied Him. Because He showed no partiality. Because He wanted them to experience liberty. But how can I allow people to experience the liberty of God if I show partiality? It cannot be done. And He says, if that's your line, if that's your standard, then there is no mercy. But notice this very last sentence. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And He calls these people to show mercy to the poor. He calls these people to show mercy to people who do not look like them. So what does that mean for this assembly here? And I'm going to press a little bit. That means when someone walks through that building and they tell us that they've been to prison, we don't let them sit by themselves. What does that mean? That means that if two people walk into this assembly and they let it be known that they're gay, we allow them to sit in these pews and hear the gospel. What does that mean? That means that if somebody that walks through that door, that's gone through a transition of gender, comes in and says, I desire to hear a sermon about Jesus Christ, you know what that means? We don't allow them to sit alone, and we don't shun them, and we don't not invite them back. You know what that means? That means that I'm allowed to sit and conversate and connect to people who vote differently than I do. You know what that means? It means that for the recently divorced person, because their spouse left them, walks through the door, it means that we engage them and don't say, well, they've got marital issues, I don't want to be connected to that. In not showing partiality, it requires that the people of God get their hands dirty. That, remember this lesson? That they invest in the messes of the world so that the glorification of the Lord and the expansion of the kingdom might take place. And if that isn't going to happen, and if you and I are just going to pack it in and be okay with being idle and consistently around people who look like us, guess what? No mercy. Home judgment. What that means is that we're simply hearers and not doers. The one thing that all of us hate, and this is the crazy thing, the one thing that all of us hate in our day-to-day lives are people who say one thing and do the exact opposite. Everybody here would be disappointed with a boss or organization who came to you and said, you know what, you've done such a great job, we're going to give you a raise, and then the day you get the raise, they say, actually, no. And the world is sick and tired of the church that says we love you and we will accept you into the fold so that you might know Jesus, and then doesn't do it. Because we like the country club. Because we like the status quo. If there's one thing that separates Jesus from everybody on the scale of history in his time, it's because he was not status quo. He didn't snuggle up to the people who were most against him so that he'd be hip and cool and win an online poll. And that's not who we're called to be. And if we're going to make a difference in the world, and if we're going to make a difference in the community, and if we're maybe even going to make a difference within the congregation that we reside in right now, no matter where you're from, there can't be partiality. There can't be discrimination. There must be mercy. Because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so this morning, that might be you. That might be you. That you've fallen so short of the glory of God that you feel that you can't get back. Well, guess what? God shows no partiality. That the one who commits adultery, and the one who commits murder, and the one who shows partiality all have an equal access to God's grace, mercy, compassion, and Jesus. And I hope this morning that if that's you, that you take advantage of that. But for those of us who have been in the church or are rediscovering Jesus, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want us to do. I want us to add somebody this week to our circle of influence who looks nothing like us. Maybe that's talking to some white people. Maybe that's talking to some black people. Maybe that's talking to some gay people. Maybe that's talking to a boss who you can't stand. Maybe it's reconnecting with a father or mother who you have no relationship with anymore. I don't know what that looks like for you, but let's do that and let's start this week so that the world might see a church that's different. A world might see a church that shows no partiality, but expresses the law of liberty. Because if we're going to be disciples, disciples don't discriminate. Let's dwell on these things this morning as we stand